Welcome to Know Before You Go for the second Sunday of Lent. My name is Father Brendan Curran once again. What a rich set of readings all throughout our Lenten season, and this one's a good one. Second Sunday of Lent, we hear about Abram being called and responding to the call of God, being blessed in the first reading, and then the call and recognition of Paul to remind the community to remember that we don't just live for earthly things, but above all, to the heights of God's love. And then, of course, the famous reading that we all could even memorize, the story of the Transfiguration in the Gospel. So let's kind of break them down today. These are powerful readings. The first one, Abram is called, and God, even though Abram can't see him, God calls him and reminds him, I will give you descendants as countless as the stars. A reminder to him that I will promise to follow through on what you have done to follow my journey, this saving journey of faith, and gift you with descendants as countless as the stars in the sky. Now, the sky is really important because we see that the geography really relates to our gospel and our first reading. Abram promised countless as the stars in the sky would be his descendants in the future. And then when we get to the gospel story, Jesus brings up Peter, James, and John up the side of the hill and reminds them as he is transformed before them with sparkling white robe. And at his side, Elijah and Moses, and brings three that he thought were prepared to be those leaders among his apostles, Peter, James, and John, and was present before them transfigured with two important, none of these things are coincidental, these are intentional, present with him Moses and Elijah. And Jesus was then embarking on a desert journey, an Exodus journey on the road to Jerusalem, as we hear in this excerpt of the Gospel of Luke. So Jesus brought them up to the hill thinking, yep, these might be prepared leaders among those following Christ. And yet those leaders didn't quite understand yet what all this saving mission was all about. Jesus revealed to them who he really was, his identity with Moses and Elijah, reminding them that this isn't just any calling, this isn't just any journey that in following Christ, but this would be a calling to follow the Messiah, that he truly was the Messiah, and a reminder with the presence of Moses, one of those powerful figures of the Israelite community. We know him well. Moses and Aaron led the Israelites from out of persecution and oppression into liberation of persecution and in slavery in Egypt. And he was present next to Christ's side. And then Elijah, a powerful voice of a prophet. These are rich symbols throughout this gospel story today because Jesus appears in front of Peter, James, and John. But again, like I said, they don't quite get it. They don't really quite understand. In fact, Peter said, how wonderful it is to be here. And they said, well, why don't we set up some tents? One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. The three of them were ready to set up some sense of what they felt understood in the meaning of this in their own sense, but they didn't quite understand it. Peter was ready to set up little chapels and own and stay in this space. But that's not why they were brought up the hill, to be Christ revealing his identity. It was so that they recognized that they were chosen in a special way and that this was a sacred journey and that they were to be sent from there to go into this public ministry and to become those ambassadors of Christ, ongoing through the rest of this public mission of Christ. And it's a great time to reflect on any of these symbols. One of them is going up the hill, being called as special leaders, getting stuck in our own journey, our own story, like any of us really are, in our sinfulness and our brokenness, in our own circumstances of being in a rut in our lives, and then we recognize we're sent forth. And then we're sent forth to be following Christ's message. So the geography is part of the calling. We can include in this rich experience of the gospel the sense of a promise of God that I will be your God, you will be my people, that are rich and reflected in that first reading of Abraham's calling, of Abram being called, that you will have descendants as countless as the stars, and a reminder of that in this gospel journey. In this journey in which three from among them arose up the hill with Christ and then called to go and embark and continue in that journey. So this is where we're at this Sunday. Don't forget that we're still not even halfway through the Lenten journey. And that it's a journey that reminds us that we're in our own sense of that experience of the desert. Remember that right at the transfiguration, Jesus, as we hear in the gospel quote, is reminding them that he is on the road of the Exodus journey to Jerusalem, that we're still in that desert journey of the 40 days of Lent. What can this be about for us? We can continue to use those powerful symbols coming out of last week from the temptations in the desert, and remembering that all through Lent there are many ways where we can stumble and fall, and many temptations we have before us. Don't lose sight of the opportunity of these three figures, Peter, James, and John, who once again get a little bit stuck in their own sense of who they are, or how powerful they are, or maybe they might be part of the winning side with Christ as being one to create the resolution, not really understanding what Jesus' journey is all about. This is what this can be for each of us, because they can get stuck just like we can get stuck. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on that, to use that as a powerful sign for our preaching and sharing this weekend. So as we take this second Sunday of Lent, it is full of many opportunities for us. It reminds us to remember, how do we continue in this mission journey? As Christ is transfigured before us, how many ways we can also remember how we have been in awe of experiences of powerful senses of God's love in our lives. That might also be another way to understand depth and meaning in this second Sunday of Lent. That this experience at that hill of transfiguration for Peter, James, and John might also reflect some of those powerful transformational experiences in our own lives, where we feel the nudge or the clarity of God's love in our lives. You can think of your own moments in which you can feel the clarity of God being at your side, but then remember, as you look forward, it can get a little cloudy quite easily in the muck and the difficulties or struggles in our own lives. There's just so much of a treasure this Sunday, the second Sunday of Lent. Let's dive into this. All through the line of the scriptures this Sunday, once again, are about a journey. Abram, journey with his wife, not ever believing that they could possibly be in their own age able to give birth, of being proud parents at such an old age, and yet with God, nothing is impossible. And God confirmed and affirmed his faith that he shared with strangers in his own midst. That's the rich story of Abram and his own family, and how God affirmed it by promising him descendants as countless as the stars. There we are on our journey. The journey up the hill with Peter, James, and John, in sensing God's presence at our side. But also our part in the Lenten journey is to come down from the hills of the awesomeness of the experience of faith experiences and share it with others. Don't hold back. Don't sit in our own comfort zones. That's where Peter, James, and John got caught in the trappings of the hill of the transfiguration. Peter wanted to set up a chapel, wanted to hold it for his own, forgetting you're not about your own journey alone. I've called you to be an apostle. Go be a fisher of people. Go out there and share the gospel. So that's it. As we continue to leave this second Sunday of Lent, how are we being sent, like Peter, James, and John, in the midst of this world that has so many ways of being broken, thirsting in a desert for experiencing the life of Christ in our midst? So let's get out there. Let's get off our heels of the awesomeness of our faith that God gifts us freely to each of us, who molded us and shaped us in God's very own image and likeness. We are just like Peter, James, and John. We have had our own transformations of God in our own lives. Now it's our job to go and share it. Share it for a world thirsting in its own sense of desert. Let's do it. We are disciples. We have been baptized. We must show we believe.